One of the guidelines for summarizing what they eat in the blue zones is foods to minimize. So it's always best to talk about what we can eat and what we should include, but just to highlight some of the foods that are not eaten regularly or commonly in the blue zones. And we're actually going to have, this video is foods to minimize, and then there's actually going to be another group of foods that we'll talk about that is foods to avoid altogether. So let's ease into that with foods to minimize. And I bet you won't be too surprised by these. I bet you could probably, if I asked you right now before I started, you could probably tell me what some of them are. So number one is meat. The guidelines that seem to hold true across the blue zones is eat meat only 2 times per week or less. Not 2 times a day or less, 2 times a week or less, which is not very much. And if you think about it, in our first video, we talked about all the plant foods that you're supposed to include 3 times a day. If you started doing that with regularity, you would probably kind of nudge out some of the meat. There just wouldn't be as much room for it or as much desire or drive for it because your plate would be filled with other things. But if we look at it from the flip side of how much meat we're supposed to have, with some side rails on it, twice a week, and then the portion's going to feel real small to you. Meat servings should be 2 ounces cooked or less. So the rule of thumb is a woman's palm, the size and thickness of a woman's palm cooked is 3 ounces. So 2/3 of that would be 2 ounces. So a very small portion of meat compared to what we're used to eating in the United States. And when we say meat, we pretty much mean red meat. So beef, ground beef, or hamburger, roast beef, steak, pork chops. They do say in the meat guideline that it's fine to eat up to 3 ounces of fish per day. And that's how all the dietary guidelines in the United States look too, is fish is different, fish is better, healthier. It's just nutritionally different from other proteins or other things that we think of as meat. And so typically the guidelines are to eat more fish and less red meat. So this is a 3 ounce portion of fish, so 3 ounces of halibut or whitefish, cod or something. This would be, if you're thinking, how am I only supposed to eat meat twice a week and such tiny portions, what am I supposed to do instead? One answer is healthier animal proteins like fish. You could actually plug those into some of the holes, and then plant proteins too would be the other place to focus. Category 2 of foods to minimize is dairy, such as cheese, cream, and butter. Cheese, Swiss cheese, American cheese, cheddar cheese, yogurt. And it's not that yogurt isn't a healthy food. I know yogurt kind of has a reputation of being healthy, and it is, but it's very nutrient dense, but it's also an animal food, and the cultures that eat in a way that minimizes disease do not include a ton of yogurt. That's just the way it is. So occasionally, but minimized. And then other dairy foods, certainly like cow's milk, ice cream that's made with cream, like whipped cream or half and half, and then butter also would be dairy foods to minimize. Category 3 is eggs, and the recommendation from the blue zones is no more than 3 eggs a week. And so that would be, whole eggs, fried eggs, hard-boiled eggs, scrambled eggs. I'm trying to think how else we eat eggs. Primarily, I guess, omelets too. So no more than 3 eggs a week. Category 4 is sugar. And I know most of you don't have sugar in this packaging at home. You just have a sugar bowl or a sugar container. And when we talk about sugar, I think you all know you should be minimizing anyway. This is not news. But what might not be familiar to you is that a lot of us think, oh, I don't add very much sugar. I only add a little bit of sugar to my oatmeal and a little bit of sugar to my coffee, so I'm not overdoing sugar. That's correct. You're not overdoing it in the sugar that you add, but the amount of sugar that food manufacturers add is shocking. So you might even be eating a food that you don't think of as tasting sweet, But if it came in a box or a bag or a can, it's entirely possible that they added sugar. Some canned corn has sugar added. Campbell's tomato soup has high fructose corn syrup added. A lot of bagged chips have sugar in their seasoning mix that goes on the outside. I'm sure you know breakfast cereals have a ton of sugar. And then if you're a person who enjoys the coffee drive-through and you get anything besides black coffee, if you get anything with syrups or a frappuccino or anything, tons and tons of sugar. Fast food drinks, soda, energy drinks, milkshakes, anything you can get at fast food like that. I know the energy drink Italian sodas are popular now, which is an energy drink and sweetened syrup. So you might be surprised to know that you're getting sugar in other places that you can't see because you didn't add it, but it's still there. So a small thing to do would just be to start to look at ingredients on the groceries that you buy to see if sugar's listed in a place you might not expect it, or look at the nutrition facts for stuff that you get at the drive-thru because that's available now. And then the last category is kind of interesting. It's bread, with the caveats that they say it's okay to eat 100% whole wheat bread, which is what this is representing. Also sourdough bread, true sourdough bread, they call it. And then they say to look for sprouted grain bread, whole grain rye, and pumpernickel. Those are the specific types of breads that they saw eaten across the blue zones. And again, not that they're unhealthy and you shouldn't eat them. We're still on just foods to minimize, not eliminate, but they don't make up a huge percentage of the diets of those populations. So just a couple guidelines about that. For true sourdough bread, I would think the best place to get that would be a local bakery and not the packaged bread at the grocery store. Maybe the grocery store bakery. I'd have to check and see if they're making homemade sourdough. But a local, separate, standalone bakery would be your best bet for getting whole grain bread, sourdough bread, rye bread, pumpernickel, or sprouted grains that don't have a lot of other things added. They're going to have the bare minimum of ingredients because they're made fresh and they're intended to be eaten quickly, and they're not intended to be on the grocery store shelves for days or weeks at a time, so then they have to add a lot of other preservatives and stuff. This could include making your own bread if you have a bread machine or a quick, easy bread recipe that you use at home. There are sprouted grain and 100% whole grain breads in the grocery store. I'm trying to think of the sprouted grain brand. Just the regular healthy bread is Dave's Killer Bread. They do a pretty good job with ingredients if you're going to buy a packaged bread. But there's a couple brands now that make sprouted grain breads. So instead of taking the grain and milling it by grinding it into flour, they sprout it first and then mill it, and that seems to make the bread out of that, and that seems to have a different health effect in our body when they do that. So you could look for sprouted grain breads in packages. Mostly I see those at like the Co-op, versus, or maybe the Fred Meyer natural section, maybe Costco, but probably not just the regular bread section at the regular grocery store. So just to recap, foods to minimize: meat, dairy, eggs, sugar, and bread.